A racist neighbor's scheme to drive out a black family backfires spectacularly when her police call interrupts their barbecue, only to reveal the mayor is their honored guest and biggest defender against neighborhood prejudice. The mid-July sun warmed the freshly cut grass of the Richardson family's backyard in Oakwood Heights. James Richardson wiped sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the string lights hanging between the oak trees. After 3 months of living in their new home, today marked their first neighborhood BBQ, a chance to finally connect with the people who shared their streets and sidewalks. "How does it look?" he called to his wife Michelle, who was arranging colorful plates and napkins on the long folding tables. Michelle stepped back to admire his work. "Perfect. The lights will look beautiful when the sun goes down." Their backyard was a labor of love. The previous owners had let it grow wild, but James and Michelle had spent weekends clearing overgrown bushes, planting flowers, and creating a space where friends and neighbors could gather. The deck gleamed with fresh stain. New patio furniture sat ready to welcome guests. All around them, Oakwood Heights displayed its historic charm. Established houses with wide porches and mature trees lined streets named after presidents and poets. For decades, the neighborhood had been almost entirely white, but in recent years, families like the Richardsons had begun moving in, slowly changing the community's makeup. Inside the house, 15-year-old Zoe Richardson sat at the kitchen counter, her head buried in a book. "Zoe, honey, could you help carry the ice?" Michelle asked, poking her head through the back door. Zoe looked up reluctantly. "Do I have to be out there the whole time?" Michelle sighed. "I know it's been tough making friends, but that's partly why we're doing this. Give people a chance to get to know you." Zoe had struggled since they moved. At her old school, she'd been a star student with a close group of friends. Here, despite her straight A's, she ate lunch alone most days. "Fine," Zoe said, closing her book. "But if anyone asks about my hair again, I'm coming back inside." Michelle winced, remembering the girl at the community pool who had asked if she could touch Zoe's braids as if she were a museum exhibit. From the backyard came the sound of bouncing basketball and laughter. 10-year-old Marcus had no trouble making friends. His outgoing nature and love for sports had quickly connected him to the neighborhood kids. "Dad." "Kevin and Jake are here early," Marcus called out as he continued dribbling. James smiled at the sight of his son playing with two boys from down the street. At least one member of the family had broken through the invisible barrier. 3 houses down, Karen Whitfield stood at her kitchen window. From this spot, she could see directly into the Richardsons' backyard. She frowned as she watched the preparations, noting every detail, the speakers being set up, the coolers filled with drinks, the growing number of cars parking along the street. "Tom, come look at this," she called to her husband. "They must have invited half the city." Tom barely glanced up from his newspaper. "They're having a barbecue, Karen. People do that in the summer." "Not like this," Karen insisted. "This neighborhood has standards. I'm the head of the neighborhood watch for a reason." Karen had held her position for 8 years. She prided herself on knowing everyone's business, whose kids got into which colleges, who was behind on their lawn care, whose marriage was in trouble. The Richardsons remained a mystery to her, and that made her uncomfortable. When they'd first moved in, she'd brought over a welcome basket and a 3-page printout of the neighborhood guidelines, unofficial rules about noise, decorations, and acceptable modifications to historic homes. Michelle had thanked her politely, but Karen left feeling dismissed. As the afternoon progressed, more cars arrived. The Richardson family greeted each guest warmly. James, in his bright blue apron, flipped burgers on the grill, As a pediatrician at the local hospital, he had invited several doctor colleagues. Michelle, who had recently been hired as a second-grade teacher at Oakwood Elementary, welcomed fellow teachers and a few parents she had met during summer school programs. The gathering was everything the Richardsons had hoped for: diverse, joyful, and exactly what they'd missed since moving from their close-knit community across town. "Music's too loud," Karen muttered to herself as she watched. "And there are way too many people for a residential area." The doorbell rang, interrupting her surveillance. Karen opened the door to find Mayor Sofia Gonzalez on her porch, holding a bottle of wine and wearing a casual sundress. "Mayor Gonzalez!" Karen exclaimed, surprised. "What brings you to our neighborhood?" The mayor smiled warmly. "I'm headed to the Richardsons' barbecue. James volunteers at the free clinic I helped establish last year." Karen's smile faltered. "You know them?" "Of course. Michelle is developing a wonderful cultural literacy program for our elementary schools. They're exactly the kind of young family we want to attract to Oakwood Heights." The mayor glanced at her watch. "Would you like to walk over together? I hear James makes amazing ribs." Karen made a quick excuse about prior commitments, closing the door as the mayor headed toward the Richardsons' house. Back at the party, the atmosphere grew more festive as the evening approached. Solar lights clicked on automatically around the yard. The smell of grilled chicken and corn filled the air. Even Zoe had emerged from the house, cautiously talking with a girl from her math class. Michelle felt a tap on her shoulder and turned. To find Mayor Gonzalez. "Sophia, you made it." She hugged the mayor warmly. "I wouldn't miss it," Sophia replied. "This is exactly what our community needs. People opening their homes, building connections." From her window, Karen watched the scene with growing agitation. The mayor's presence complicated things. She had planned to call in a noise complaint, but now she hesitated. The final straw came when Marcus and his friends ran through the yard, laughing and spraying each other with water guns. As water splashed onto her carefully maintained roses along the fence line, Karen reached for her phone. "This is getting out of hand," she muttered, dialing the non-emergency police number she knew by heart. They need to learn there are rules in Oakwood Heights. As the sky turned golden and the string lights began to twinkle in the Richardsons' yard, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the character of everyone involved, and the true nature of the community they all called home. The blue and red lights flashed silently at first. James noticed them while reaching for another tray of chicken wings. The police cruiser moved slowly down the street, finally stopping in front of their house. "James?" Michelle said quietly, touching his arm. She had seen it too. Around them, the cheerful conversations began to fade as more guests noticed the police car. The music, which had been at a perfectly reasonable volume, suddenly seemed too loud in the awkward silence. James set down the tray and wiped his hands on his apron. "I'll handle this." He walked across the lawn toward the front yard, his back straight, his face carefully composed. Behind him, he could hear Michelle gathering the children closer to her. Officer Thompson stepped out of his cruiser. He was a young white man, maybe in his early 30s, with short brown hair and a cautious expression. He approached the property line and stopped. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Officer Thompson. We received a call about a disturbance at this address." James took a deep breath before responding. "Good evening, officer. I'm James Richardson. This is my home. We're having a barbecue with friends and neighbors." Several guests had followed James to the front yard. Mayor Gonzalez emerged from the crowd and stepped forward. "Officer Thompson," she said with a nod. "I'm Mayor Gonzalez. I'm a guest here today, and I can assure you there's no disturbance. Just a lovely neighborhood gathering." The officer looked surprised to see the mayor. He shifted his weight uncomfortably. "We have to respond to all calls, Mayor. The report mentioned excessive noise and possible underage drinking." From the corner of his eye, James saw Karen Whitfield standing on her porch 3 houses down. Her arms were crossed, her expression smug as she watched the scene unfold. "Officer, would you like to come into the backyard and see for yourself?" James asked, his voice calm and steady despite the anger building inside him. "We have about 30 adults and a few children. The music is at a reasonable level, and everyone here is over 21 except for my children and their friends." Officer Thompson hesitated, then nodded. "That would be helpful, thank you." As they walked through the side gate into the backyard, James was painfully aware of how the atmosphere had changed. The joyful celebration had transformed into an awkward, tense gathering. Some neighbors looked embarrassed, avoiding eye contact. Others watched curiously. A few were already gathering their things to leave. Michelle stood by the grill, one arm around each of their children. Her smile was gone, replaced by a tight expression James knew too well. It was the face she made when trying to stay strong in front of the kids. "This is my wife, Michelle, and—" "Our children, Zoe and Marcus," James said. Officer Thompson nodded politely. "Ma'am, kids." Zoe stared at the ground, her cheeks burning with shame. Marcus looked confused, his eyes darting between the officer and his parents. "Did we do something wrong, Dad?" Marcus asked, his voice small. The simple question hit James like a punch to the gut. "No, buddy, we didn't do anything wrong. The officer is just checking to make sure everyone is having a good time." James turned to Officer Thompson. "As you can see, this is a family event. The music isn't even as loud as it was earlier, and we plan to wrap things up by 9 o'clock out of respect for the neighbors." Officer Thompson surveyed the scene, the carefully arranged food tables, the adults holding paper plates, the children playing quietly now in the corner of the yard. It was clear there was no disturbance to address. "Everything seems to be in order," he said. "Sorry to have interrupted your gathering." Mayor Gonzalez stepped forward again. "Officer Thompson, I'm curious about the nature of this complaint. Who exactly reported this supposed disturbance?" "I'm not at liberty to say, Mayor," Thompson replied. "We keep that information confidential." "Of course," the mayor said with a tight smile. "Though I think we all have our suspicions." As Officer Thompson turned to leave, James walked with him toward the front yard. Once they were out of earshot of the children, James spoke again. "Officer, I want you to understand something. This wasn't just an inconvenience. When you showed up with your lights flashing, you didn't just interrupt a barbecue, you humiliated my family in front of our new neighbors and friends." Officer Thompson stopped walking and turned to face James. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. When we get a call, we have to respond." "I understand that," James said. "But I also need you to understand that when someone calls the police on a black family for simply existing in their own backyard, it's not just an innocent mistake. It's something my children will remember for the rest of their lives." Back in the yard, Zoe had disappeared into the house. Michelle found her in her bedroom, sitting on the edge of her bed, tears streaming down her face. "Honey," Michelle said, softly, sitting beside her. "This is exactly why I didn't want to invite anyone from school," Zoe said, wiping furiously at her tears. "I knew something like this would happen. I just knew it." Michelle put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." "Taylor from math class was actually talking to me," Zoe continued. "We were making plans to go to the mall next weekend. Now she probably thinks we're criminals or something. We are not criminals, Michelle said firmly. And anyone who thinks that because someone called the police on our family barbecue isn't worth your time anyway. Zoe looked up at her mother, her eyes red. Is this why you didn't want to move here? You told Dad it wasn't a good idea. Michelle sighed. She had indeed warned James about Oakwood Heights. Despite its beautiful homes and excellent school district, she had heard stories from other black families who had moved to predominantly white suburbs. But James had been so excited about the house, with its big yard and the short commute to the hospital. Your father and I made this decision together, Michelle said carefully. Every neighborhood has its challenges. We just have to be strong enough to face them. Meanwhile, in the backyard, the party had split into distinct groups. Several white neighbors had made quick excuses and left. Others, including the mayor and James's hospital colleagues, had stayed, making a point to be more animated and engaged than before. Karen Whitfield had finally left her porch and was now standing at the edge of the yard watching the aftermath of her call. James's closest friend, Dr. Robeson, approached him at the grill. Man, you know who made that call, right? The lady standing over there looked like she swallowed a lemon. James nodded, flipping a burger that no one would probably eat now. Karen Whitfield, our neighborhood welcome committee. You want me to say something to her? Dr. Robeson asked. Because I got some words ready. No, James said firmly. This is still our home. We have to live here after everyone leaves. Dr. Robeson shook his head. Always the diplomat. That's why you're the pediatrician and I'm the surgeon. I'd have cut her off at the knees by now. When Officer Thompson reached his cruiser, he found another officer waiting for him. Officer Diane Chen was his supervisor, a 20-year veteran of the force. Got your message, Chen said. Noise complaint at Richardson Place? False alarm, Thompson replied. Just a family barbecue, nothing out of order. Chen nodded slowly. Let me guess. Karen Whitfield called it in? Thompson raised his eyebrows. You know I can't confirm that. You don't have to, Chen said. This isn't the first time we've had calls like this in Oakwood Heights. Last summer it was the Lopez family's graduation party. Before that, the Patel's Diwali celebration. Thompson leaned against the cruiser. So what are we supposed to do? We have to respond to calls. Yes, we do, Chen agreed. But we also have to be aware when our department is being used to harass people. She looked toward the Richardson house. That man is a pediatrician at County General. His wife is a teacher. They're good people. I know, Thompson said quietly. I felt like an idiot there. Their kid asked if they'd done something wrong. Chen's expression softened. That's the part that always gets me too. Inside the house, Marcus sat at the kitchen counter, sipping a juice box and watching the adults through the window. His father was talking to some neighbors, his face serious. His mother was arranging cookies on a plate, though no one seemed interested in dessert anymore. Mom, he said when she came back inside for more napkins. Why did that lady call the police on us? Michelle set down the napkins and took a seat beside her son. Sometimes, honey, people are afraid of things that are different from what they're used to. But we're not different, Marcus insisted. We're just having a barbecue like everybody does. Michelle stroked his curly hair. I know, sweetheart. And that's what we have to keep doing. Living our lives, being ourselves, showing everyone that we belong here just as much as they do. Outside, James found himself face to face with Karen Whitfield, who had finally decided to approach him directly. I hope there are no hard feelings, she said, her voice falsely sweet. I was just concerned about the noise level. Some of us have early mornings tomorrow. James looked at her steadily. Mrs. Whitfield, we both know this wasn't about noise. My family has lived here for 3 months, and we've had nothing but cold shoulders from you. That's not true, Karen protested. I brought you a welcome basket. Along with 3 pages of rules that don't exist in any official capacity, James said. Look, I don't want any trouble. We moved here for the same reasons you probably live here. Good schools, safe streets, nice homes. All we want is to be treated with the same respect as any other family. Karen's face flushed. Well, I think you people are being overly sensitive. This has nothing to do with you people, James interrupted, his calm finally slipping. That's exactly the problem, Mrs. Whitfield. We're not you people. We're the Richardsons. I'm a doctor. My wife is a teacher. Our children get straight A's. We mow our lawn every Saturday. We pay our taxes. We belong here. The backyard had gone quiet as people noticed the confrontation. Michelle appeared at James's side, slipping her hand into his. James, she said quietly, the children. He took a deep breath, squeezing her hand. In that moment, with his wife beside him, James was reminded of all they had overcome together. From college scholarships to medical school, from their first apartment to this beautiful home, they had always faced challenges side by side. You're right, he said to Michelle, then turned back to Karen. Mrs. Whitfield, I hope someday you'll join us for a barbecue properly, as a neighbor. Until then, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave our property. Karen turned without another word and stalked back to her house. As she left, Mayor Gonzalez approached the couple. I'm so sorry this happened, she said. This isn't what our community stands for. With all due respect, Mayor, Michelle replied, it seems like it might be exactly what some people think this community stands for. The question is, what are the rest of us going to do about it? The mayor nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly the right question. She looked around at the remaining guests, who were watching the exchange. And it's one we all need to answer, not just today, but every day we choose to live here together. As the sun set over Oakwood Heights, the Richardson family's barbecue continued, smaller than before, but somehow more meaningful. Those who had stayed were making a statement with their presence. They were choosing which version of the community they wanted to belong to. And in the kitchen window, Zoe and Marcus watched their parents standing tall in their own backyard, showing them what it meant to claim your place in the world, even when others tried to deny it to you. The confrontation, with Karen hung in the air like the heavy summer humidity. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, unsure where to look or what to do. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle clinking of ice in glasses, and Marcus's basketball bouncing in the distance. Mayor Gonzalez stepped forward, her presence commanding attention without effort. She had been observing the exchange between James and Karen with a thoughtful expression, and now her time to intervene had come. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. I believe I understand what happened here tonight. Karen's chin lifted defensively. I was simply concerned about the noise, Mayor. Anyone would have done the same. Would they? The mayor asked, glancing around at the other neighbors. Because I've been here for over an hour, and the volume has been perfectly reasonable. The children have been well behaved. The gathering is taking place at an appropriate hour. Karen folded her arms across her chest. Well, it seemed loud from my house. Mrs. Whitfield, the mayor continued, I grew up in this city. My parents were the first Hispanic family on their block. I know what it's like when neighbors call the police because they're uncomfortable with who you are, not what you're doing. Several neighbors murmured in agreement, including a middle-aged white couple James recognized from down the street. The woman, he thought her name was Linda, stepped forward. "Karen, this isn't right," Linda said. "The Richardsons have been nothing but nice since they moved in. Their yard looks better than it has in years. They're not causing any trouble." "And the music was not too loud," added another neighbor, a tall man with gray hair. "We live right next door, and my wife and I were enjoying it from our porch." Karen's face flushed deeper. "I was just trying to maintain the standards of our neighborhood." "And what standards are those exactly?" James asked, his voice steady and clear. "Because if they include calling the police on families who are simply existing in their own homes, then those aren't standards worth maintaining." Michelle squeezed his hand in silent support as he continued. "My wife and I chose Oakwood Heights because we wanted our children to grow up in a safe, beautiful neighborhood with good schools. We saved for years to afford this house. We maintain our property. We follow the rules. The only difference between us and most of you is the color of our skin." He looked around at the gathered neighbors. "We're not asking for special treatment. We're just asking to be allowed to host a barbecue, to make friends, to live our lives without being treated like criminals in our own backyard." Officer Thompson, who had been standing quietly near the gate, stepped forward. "For what it's worth, there's clearly no violation here. No noise ordinance issues, no public disturbance." He looked directly at Karen. "Ma'am, in the future, please consider whether a situation truly requires police intervention." The mayor nodded in approval at the officer's words, then turned to address everyone. "This is a moment of choice for Oakwood Heights," she said. "We can be a community that calls the police when new neighbors don't look like us. Or we can be a community that brings over welcome baskets and actually means it. We can talk about property values when what we're really talking about is fear of change. Or we can recognize that diversity makes our community stronger, not weaker." She moved to stand beside James and Michelle. "I'm proud to call the Richardsons my friends. Their daughter was in my Nina's class last year, and Michelle is developing an incredible cultural literacy program for our schools. James volunteers at our free clinic. They make Oakwood Heights better by being here." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Several neighbors who had been hovering uncertainty now moved closer, clearly choosing sides. Karen stood alone, now, her posture stiff. "I never said anything about race," she insisted, but her voice had lost its certainty. "You didn't have to," Michelle said quietly. "Actions speak louder than words, Mrs. Whitfield." Zoe had emerged from the house, standing in the doorway watching the scene unfold. Her eyes were still red from crying, but she stood tall, watching her parents with a new expression: pride. Marcus ran over from where he'd been playing with his friends. "Dad, is the police officer leaving? Can we turn the music back on?" James ruffled his son's hair. "Yes to both questions, buddy." As if on cue, the speakers began playing again. Someone had restarted the music. It was James's favorite song, an upbeat Motown classic that had been playing when he and Michelle first met in college. Officer Thompson tipped his hat. "Enjoy your evening, folks. Sorry for the interruption." As he turned to leave, James walked with him to the gate. "Thank you," James said quietly. "Just doing my job," Thompson replied, but there was understanding in his eyes. Back in the yard, the mayor was already helping Michelle rearrange the food tables. Other neighbors had stepped in to assist, creating a buzz of activity that felt like the community gathering they had originally planned. The mayor raised her voice slightly to be heard over the renewed conversations. I think it's time we all sat down together and enjoyed this wonderful food the Richardsons have prepared. There's room for everyone at this table. Her eyes met Karen's, the invitation clear. Everyone, she repeated. The gesture hung in the air, a tuo, chance for reconciliation, for a new beginning. The entire gathering seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what Karen would choose. Karen looked around at the faces watching her. She saw no anger, just expectation, a chance to step back from the edge she had created. Her shoulders dropped slightly as the defensiveness began to fade. I suppose I could stay for a little while, she said, her voice softer than before. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was a step back from conflict, an acceptance of the olive branch being offered. James and Michelle exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. Relief, lingering frustration, cautious hope. Then Michelle smiled, the genuine warm smile that had first made James fall in love with her 20 years ago. Let's eat, she said, addressing everyone. The food's getting cold. As neighbors began filling plates and finding seats at the tables, Marcus tugged on his father's hand. Dad, he whispered, did we win? James looked around at the gathering, at neighbors talking who had never spoken before, at Zoe cautiously rejoining the party, at Michelle directing people to the food with renewed confidence, even at Karen awkwardly accepting a plate from the mayor. It's not about winning, buddy, he said gently. It's about standing your ground while still leaving room for people to change. Under the string lights that James had so carefully hung that morning, a different kind of community was forming. One built on confronting uncomfortable truths, on standing firm against injustice, but also on leaving the door open for growth and connection. As twilight deepened into evening, the music played on, and the Richardson family's backyard became exactly what they had hoped for all along, a place where neighbors gathered not as strangers divided by differences, but as people sharing a meal, a conversation, and the beginning of understanding. As the evening continued, something remarkable happened in the Richardsons' backyard. What had nearly been destroyed by a phone call was slowly rebuilding itself into something stronger. The music played again, softer now but somehow more meaningful. The aroma of grilled food still filled the air, and laughter, cautious at first, then more genuine, returned. Officer Thompson had declined James's surprising invitation to stay, but he had accepted a plate of food to go with a nod of appreciation. As he left, he stopped to speak quietly with James. Dr. Richardson, I want you to know this wasn't right. I'm sorry about how this went down. James nodded. Thank you for saying that. It matters. Mayor Gonzalez had taken a seat at the central table, deliberately creating a space where different neighbors could gather. She waved Karen over as the woman stood uncertainly at the edge of the yard. Mrs. Whitfield, the mayor called. There's room here if you'd like to join us. Everyone watched as Karen hesitated. Her face flushed with embarrassment. But after a moment, she walked stiffly to the table and sat down. From the kitchen window, Zoe and Marcus watched in amazement. She's actually staying? Zoe whispered. Mom always says you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Marcus replied, repeating one of Michelle's favorite sayings without fully understanding it. Outside, Michelle was setting a fresh plate of cornbread on the table. My grandmother's recipe, she said. The secret is adding a bit of honey to the batter. Karen tentatively took a piece. It's very good, she admitted after taking a bite. The other end of the table, James found himself in conversation with Bill Peterson, an older white man who lived across the street. They had exchanged polite waves since the Richardsons moved in, but never really spoke. "I served in the Army with a man from Baltimore," Bill was saying. "Best medic I ever knew. Saved my life in '91 during Desert Storm." "My father was in the Army," James replied. "He didn't make it to college, but he made sure I would." Bill nodded thoughtfully. "My son's a sophomore at State, thinking about pre-med. If he ever wants to shadow a pediatrician for a day, let me know," James offered. "It's good to get a real feel for the profession before committing to all those years of school." "I'd appreciate that," Bill said, looking genuinely pleased. Nearby, Michelle had discovered that Rachel Goldman, who lived 2 doors down, taught music at a neighboring elementary school. "We should collaborate on that cultural arts program you're developing," Rachel suggested excitedly. "I've been wanting to introduce my students to music from different traditions, but I wasn't sure where to start." "I'd love that," Michelle said warmly. "Maybe we could meet for coffee next week and brainstorm." As the adults talked, Marcus had gathered a group of neighborhood children for an impromptu game of flashlight tag as darkness fell. Their squeals and laughter provided a soundtrack to the evening, reminding everyone of the simplicity of childhood. Connections. Mayor Gonzalez stood up, tapping her glass gently for attention. The conversations quieted as people turned to look at her. "I want to thank James and Michelle for opening their home to us tonight," she began. "What happened earlier? This evening?" She paused, looking meaningfully around the table. "Is unfortunately not uncommon in our city or in our country. But what's happening right now, that's the uncommon part. That's the part worth celebrating." She gestured to the diverse group gathered around the table. "This is what a community looks like. Not perfect, not without disagreements or misunderstandings, but willing to come to the table, to listen, to grow." Karen stared down at her plate during the mayor's speech. When it was over, she stood up abruptly. "I should help clean up," she said, gathering empty plates. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but it didn't go unnoticed. Michelle caught James's eye across the yard and raised an eyebrow slightly. He gave a small nod in response. They had spent enough years together to have entire conversations without words. As Karen passed with her stack of plates, James stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said quietly. "Thank you." She paused, meeting his eyes briefly. "Your children seem very well raised," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "Marcus helped Timothy with his batting stance earlier. He's quite good with younger kids." "He has a good heart," James replied. "We all do, if we give each other the chance to see it." Later, as the evening wound down, the mayor pulled James and Michelle aside. "I meant what I said about the community," she told them. "But I also want you to know I'm taking practical steps. Next week, I'm meeting with the police chief about community response protocols. We need to address how these calls are handled." "That would mean a lot," Michelle said. "Not just for us, but for every family that moves here after us." The mayor smiled. "That's exactly why I ran for office, to make this city work for everyone who calls it home." By 11 o'clock, the yard was empty of guests. The string lights still glowed softly overhead as James and Michelle sat on their porch swing, tired but somehow lighter than they had felt in months. "So," Michelle said, leaning her head on her husband's shoulder. "Not exactly the neighborhood welcome party we planned." James laughed softly. "No, it was better. It was real." "Did you see Zoe exchanging phone numbers with that girl from her math class? And Marcus has about 6 new baseball buddies," James added. "They're already planning a game for Sunday afternoon." Michelle was quiet for a moment. Do you think anything will really change with Karen? With the neighborhood? I don't know, James answered honestly. But tonight, people chose which side of the fence they wanted to stand on. Most of them chose right. Inside the house, Zoe had already changed into her pajamas. She stopped in the living room where her mother had placed a framed photograph on the mantel earlier that day. It showed the four of them standing in front of their new home on moving day, their faces filled with hope and possibility. Beside it now was a Polaroid someone had taken tonight. The Richardson family surrounded by new friends and neighbors, the string lights twinkling overhead. It wasn't a perfect picture. Some faces were blurry, and the lighting was uneven. But it captured something the professional family portrait hadn't. A family that wasn't just occupying a house, but claiming their place in a community. The next morning, James went out early to pick up the Sunday paper. He was surprised to find a plate of cinnamon rolls on the porch with a note, "Welcome to the neighborhood. The Goldman family." As he brought them inside, he saw Bill Peterson waving from across the street as he collected his own paper. 2 doors down, Karen Whitfield was watering her roses. When she saw him looking, she gave a small, stiff nod. Wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. And as James closed the door, carrying the warm rolls to his waiting family, he knew that sometimes beginnings were all you needed to change the ending.